It was just another day on the set of Steve Harvey, the talk show that had become a staple in millions of households. Laughter, heartfelt moments, and inspiring stories were what Steve brought to his audience each day. But this particular morning felt different, though no one could quite put their finger on why. As Steve took his seat, smiling and waving at the cheering crowd, he glanced down at his notes for the day's lineup. One name stood out: Karoline Leavitt. He didn't know much about her, but something told him this guest might bring something special to the show. When Karoline walked onto the stage, there was an immediate shift in the atmosphere. She wasn't flashy or famous like some of the celebrities who usually appeared on the show. Instead, she carried herself with a quiet confidence that made people curious. Her warm smile and gentle demeanor drew the audience in before she even said a word. As she sat down across from Steve, the room grew quieter than usual, almost as if everyone sensed they were about to hear something important. Steve leaned forward in his chair, his signature charm giving way to genuine curiosity. "So, Karoline," he began, "tell us a little bit about yourself. What brings you here today?" Karoline took a deep breath, looking out at the sea of faces watching her. For a brief moment, she seemed nervous, but then she smiled softly and started speaking. "Well, Steve, I'm not someone you'd typically see on a talk show. I'm not an actor or a singer or anything like that. My story is, well, it's pretty simple, but it's also been a journey, a tough one." Her voice carried a sincerity that grabbed everyone's attention. The audience settled into their seats, leaning forward slightly, eager to hear more. Steve nodded, encouraging her to continue. "Go ahead," he said gently. "We're listening." Karoline paused for a second, collecting her thoughts. Then she began sharing pieces of her life, how she grew up in a small town where dreams often stayed dreams because reality got in the way. She talked about how her family struggled financially and how her mother worked multiple jobs just to keep food on the table. There was no bitterness in her tone, only gratitude for the lessons those hardships taught her. As she spoke, you could see the emotions playing across her face, the pain of remembering difficult times, but also the pride of having overcome them. It was clear that Karoline wasn't just telling her story, she was reliving it. And as she did, the connection between her and the audience grew stronger. Even Steve, known for his quick wit and jokes, stayed silent, letting her words sink in. The time she finished this part of her story, the energy in the room had shifted completely. People weren't just curious anymore, they were invested. They wanted to know more about this woman who seemed so ordinary, yet radiated such extraordinary strength. Little did they know this was only the beginning of a conversation that would leave a lasting impact on everyone present, including Steve himself. Karoline's voice softened as she continued, pulling the audience deeper into her world. "Growing up wasn't easy," she admitted, her eyes drifting downward for a moment before meeting Steve's gaze again. "We didn't have much. Money was always tight. My mom did everything she could to make sure my siblings and I had what we needed, but there were still days when things felt impossible." She went on to describe life in their small town, where opportunities seemed few and far between. Her family lived paycheck to paycheck, often relying on hand-me-down clothes and discounted groceries just to get by. "There were nights when dinner was bread and butter because that's all we had left," she said quietly. "But my mom never complained. She always told us, we may not have much, but we have each other, and that's enough." Steve nodded thoughtfully, his expression serious now. He could see the weight of those memories in Karoline's eyes, the mix of sadness and gratitude. "That must have been tough," he said gently. "How did you handle it? What kept you going?" Karoline smiled faintly as if recalling something deeply personal. "Honestly, it was my mom's strength that kept me going. She worked 2 jobs most of the time, sometimes 3. She'd come home exhausted, but she'd still sit with me and help me with my homework or listen to me talk about my day. She taught me that no matter how hard things got, giving up wasn't an option. But it wasn't just financial struggles that shaped Karoline's childhood. She opened up about the isolation she felt at school, where kids teased her for wearing second-hand clothes and bringing peanut butter sandwiches every day. I remember sitting alone at lunch, pretending I wasn't hungry so no one would notice. I didn't have anything else to eat, she shared. Her voice trembled slightly, but she pressed on. It hurt, Steve. It really did. But instead of letting it break me, I decided to use it as fuel. To prove them wrong. Steve leaned back in his chair, visibly moved. You know, a lot of people might have let that bitterness consume them, he said. But you turned it into motivation. That takes guts. Karoline nodded. Yeah, I guess I did. But honestly, I think it came from wanting to make my mom proud. I didn't want her sacrifices to be for nothing, so I threw myself into schoolwork. I read every book I could find, wrote stories late at night, and dreamed of a future where I wouldn't have to worry about bills or being looked down on. Her passion for storytelling became her lifeline during those difficult years. She explained how writing allowed her to escape into a world where she had control, a place where her imagination could run free and her problems felt smaller. I'd write about characters who faced challenges just like mine but found ways to overcome them, she said. In a way, those stories gave me hope. They reminded me that even when life feels overwhelming, there's always a way forward. The audience listened intently, many nodding along as if they'd experienced similar struggles themselves. Some wiped away tears, while others sat perfectly still, captivated by Karoline's honesty. Steve glanced around the room, sensing the emotional connection forming between Karoline and the crowd. You mentioned your mom a lot, Steve said after a pause. What does she think now? Does she realize how much she inspired you? Karoline's face lit up at the mention of her mother. Oh, absolutely. She's my biggest supporter. When I told her I wanted to start helping others who were going through what we went through, she cried. Not because she was sad, but because she was proud. She always said, if you can rise above this, anyone can. And now, I try to pass that message on to others. As Karoline spoke, it was clear that her bond with her mother was the foundation of her resilience. Their love for each other had carried them through some of the darkest times, teaching Karoline valuable lessons about perseverance, kindness, and the power of believing in yourself. By the time she finished sharing this chapter of her life, the room was filled with a sense of admiration, not just for Karoline, but for the countless unsung heroes like her mom, who worked tirelessly behind the scenes to provide for their families. Steve, sensing the gravity of the moment, took a deep breath before speaking. You know, Karoline, he said, his voice full of sincerity, what you've shared so far is already inspiring, but I have a feeling this is just the beginning of your story. Am I right? Karoline smiled, her eyes shining with both pride and emotion. Yes, Steve, this is just the start. Karoline paused for a moment, collecting her thoughts before diving into the next chapter of her story. The room was silent, save for the faint hum of anticipation in the air. Steve leaned forward slightly, his curiosity evident as he waited for her to continue. There's one moment that changed everything for me, Karoline began, her voice steady but tinged with emotion. It's the reason I'm sitting here today. She explained how at 16 years old she found herself at a crossroads. Life had been tough, and though she tried to stay positive, there were days when doubt crept in. I remember thinking, what's the point? Does anyone even care about what I have to say? She confessed. But then something happened. That made me realize my voice mattered more than I ever imagined. It all started with an essay writing competition held by a local organization. One of her teachers encouraged her to enter, praising her writing skills and telling her she had a unique perspective worth sharing. At first, Karoline hesitated. I didn't think I stood a chance, she admitted. But my teacher kept pushing, me saying, you never know unless you try. So I decided to give it a shot. For weeks, Karoline poured her heart into the essay. She wrote about growing up poor, about the struggles her family faced, and about the lessons she learned along the way. She talked about her dreams for the future and how she hoped to help others who felt trapped in tough situations. I wasn't writing to win, she clarified. I just wanted someone, anyone, to hear my story, to understand that people like me exist and that we're trying our best. When the day of the competition arrived, Karoline felt a mix of excitement and nerves. She walked into the auditorium where the winners would be announced, clutching her notebook tightly. As the names of the runners-up were called, she braced herself for disappointment. But then, something incredible happened. "They called my name," Karoline said, her voice breaking slightly as tears welled up in her eyes. I froze for a second. I couldn't believe it. Me? Winning? It didn't feel real. She laughed softly, shaking her head at the memory. And then I heard my mom cheering from the crowd. That's when it hit me. I'd actually done it. No. Prize was more than just recognition. It came with a scholarship to attend college, a dream Karoline had almost given up on. I ran straight to my mom after they handed me the trophy, she recalled, smiling through her tears. We hugged and cried together. For the first time, I truly believed that maybe, just maybe, things could get better. Steve wiped his brow, visibly moved by her story. That must have been such a powerful moment for you and your mom, he said. What did it feel like, knowing you'd beaten the odds? Karoline took a deep breath, reflecting on the question. It wasn't just about winning, she replied. It was about proving to myself that no matter how hard life gets, you can still find a way to shine. That moment taught me that my struggles weren't wasted. They shaped me into who I am. And if I could overcome all of that, I could do anything. Her words resonated deeply with the audience, many of whom nodded in agreement or dabbed at their eyes. There was a collective sense of triumph in the room, as if everyone was celebrating Karoline's victory alongside her. Steve chimed in, his tone warm and encouraging. You know, a lot of people go through life feeling invisible, like their voices don't matter. But what you did proves that isn't true. You turned your pain into purpose. Karoline nodded, her expression thoughtful. Exactly, Steve. That's exactly what I want people to take away from this. Your past doesn't define you, it prepares you. Every challenge you face is building you up for something greater. You just have to keep going even when it feels impossible. As she spoke, it was clear that this turning point wasn't just a personal milestone for Karoline. It was the foundation for everything she would achieve later in life. The scholarship opened doors she never thought possible, allowing her to pursue education and opportunities she once believed were out of reach. But more importantly, it gave her the confidence to step into her own power and use her experiences to inspire others. Steve glanced at the audience, sensing the impact of Karoline's story. This is why we need stories like yours, he said, earnestly. Because they remind us that no matter where you start, you can create a future full of hope and possibility. Karoline smiled, her gratitude evident. Thank you, Steve. That means so much coming from you. She paused, looking out at the crowd. But trust me, this isn't the end of the story, not even close. With those words, the energy in the room shifted again. The audience leaned in, eager to hear what came next. Steve grinned, clearly intrigued. All right, Karoline, he said. Let's hear it. What happened after that? Little did they know, the most impactful part of her journey was yet to come. Karoline's story had already taken the audience on an emotional roller coaster, but she wasn't done yet. With a deep breath, she transitioned to the next chapter of her journey, a chapter that showcased not just her resilience but also her heart. Winning that scholarship changed my life, she began, her voice steady and reflective. But it wasn't just about me anymore. I realized that if someone had believed in me when I needed it most, maybe I could do the same for others. She explained how, during college, she became increasingly aware of the challenges faced by young people in similar situations to hers. Many of them didn't have access to mentors, resources, or even basic support systems. I saw kids who reminded me of myself, bright, full of potential, but stuck in circumstances that made them feel invisible, she said. It broke my heart, Steve. I knew I couldn't sit back and do nothing. That's when Karoline decided to take action. After graduating, she founded a nonprofit organization aimed at helping underprivileged youth unlock their potential. The IRE mission was simple yet powerful: provide tools, guidance, and encouragement to those who felt like they had no way out. I wanted to create a space where these kids could see themselves as more than their struggles, she explained. A place where they could dream big and know someone believed in them. Steve listened intently, his expression softening further with each word. So, what does your organization actually do? He asked, genuinely curious. Karoline lit up as she described the various programs her nonprofit offered. There were workshops focused on building confidence and life skills, tutoring sessions to help students excel academically, and counseling services to address emotional challenges. She also mentioned partnerships with local businesses to offer internships and job training opportunities. We try to cover all bases, she said with a smile, because success isn't just about getting good grades, it's about preparing for real life. But what truly set her work apart was the personal touch she brought to everything. Karoline made it a point to connect with the participants regularly, listening to their stories and offering advice based on her own experiences. I tell them, look, I've been where you are. I know how hard it is, but I also know you're stronger than you think, she shared. Sometimes hearing that from someone who's walked the same path makes all the difference. Her passion was infectious and the audience hung on every word. Steve nodded approvingly, clearly impressed. That's incredible, he said. You're not just giving them resources, you're showing them they matter. That's huge. Karoline smiled humbly, brushing off the compliment. It's not about me, Steve, it's about them. Every kid deserves a chance to succeed, regardless of where they come from. If I can help even one person realize their worth, then it's all worth it. To illustrate the impact of her work, Karoline shared a few anonymous examples of individuals whose lives had transformed through her programs. One participant went from struggling in school to earning top marks and securing a spot in a prestigious university. Another found stability after years of bouncing between foster homes, thanks to mentorship and career guidance provided by the nonprofit. Each story was a testament to the power of belief and opportunity. Steve leaned forward, visibly moved. These aren't just numbers or statistics. They're real people whose futures you've helped shape, he said. That's something money can't buy. Karoline nodded, her eyes shining with pride. Exactly. And the best part? They often come back to volunteer or mentor others once they're in a better place. It's like this ripple effect of hope and kindness. The audience erupted into applause, many standing to show their appreciation. Karoline waved modestly, clearly uncomfortable with the spotlight but grateful for the support. Steve joined in clapping enthusiastically before turning back to her. You know, Karoline, what you're doing is so important. In a world that often feels divided, you're bringing people together and reminding them of their humanity. Karoline smiled, warmly, her gratitude evident. Thank you, Steve. Honestly, none of this would have been possible without the people who believed in me along the way. Now it's my turn to pay it forward. As she spoke, there was a palpable sense of unity in the room. People weren't just listening. They were connecting with Karoline, with her mission, and with the universal message of hope she represented. Steve sensed the weight of the moment and took a moment to reflect aloud. You know, we talk a lot about success on this show, he said, but true success isn't about fame or fortune. It's about making a difference. And you, my friend, are doing exactly that. Karoline's face softened, touched by his words. I appreciate that more than you know, she replied. But honestly, the real heroes are the kids. They're the ones fighting every day to build better lives for themselves. All I'm trying to do is give them a little push. With those heartfelt words, the segment reached a crescendo. The audience remained captivated, eager to hear more. Steve grinned, sensing the perfect setup for what was coming next. All right, Karoline, he said. You've inspired us. You've shown us your heart. But I have a feeling there's still more to this story. Am I right? Karoline chuckled softly, her eyes twinkling with anticipation. Oh, absolutely. This is where things get really special. The room buzzed with excitement, everyone leaning in to hear what came next. Whatever it was clear that Karoline's journey was far from over, and neither was the impact she was about to leave on the hearts of everyone watching. Just when the audience thought Karoline's story couldn't get any more inspiring, she revealed she had a surprise planned, one that would leave everyone in tears, including Steve Harvey. "There's one more thing I want to share with you. Today," she said, her voice trembling slightly as she looked at Steve. "But before I explain, I need to tell you why it means so much." She went on to describe how her nonprofit had grown over the years, touching countless lives along the way. But what she cherished most were the relationships she built with the people she helped. "These aren't just participants or beneficiaries. To me, they're family," she explained. "Every single person has taught me something valuable. They've reminded me why I started this journey in the first place." Steve nodded, his curiosity piqued. "So what's the surprise?" he asked, leaning forward in his chair. Karoline smiled softly, glancing toward the crew behind the scenes. "Well, I reached out to some of the individuals whose lives have been impacted by the organization and asked them to send messages, just short notes saying whatever they wanted to say. Some sent videos, others wrote letters, and we put it all together into a montage for you and for me." The room fell silent as the lights dimmed, and a large screen lit up behind them. The video began playing, and immediately, the atmosphere shifted. Faces filled the screen, people of all ages sharing their gratitude, their struggles, and their triumphs. One young woman spoke about how Karoline's mentorship helped her break free from self-doubt and pursue her dream of becoming a teacher. Another shared how the nonprofit connected him with resources that allowed him to escape homelessness. Each message was heartfelt, raw, and deeply personal. As the clips rolled, Steve turned to watch the screen, but it wasn't long before he glanced back at Karoline. Tears were streaming down her face as she listened to the voices of those she'd helped. Her hands covered her mouth, overwhelmed by the love and appreciation pouring out from the screen. But then came a moment that hit Steve and the entire audience, right in the heart. A teenage boy appeared on the screen, his eyes glistening with emotion. "Karoline, I don't know if you remember me," he began, his voice cracking, "but you saved my life. You showed me that I mattered when no one else did. Because of you, I'm still here today, chasing my dreams. Thank you for not giving up on me." That was the breaking point for Steve. He removed his glasses, blinking back tears as he tried to compose himself. For someone who prided himself on keeping things light and humorous, this was uncharted territory. Yet, there was no hiding the depth of emotion overtaking him. By the time the video ended, he was openly crying, his shoulders shaking as he struggled to regain composure. The audience wasn't faring much better. People dabbed at their eyes with tissues, while others openly sobbed, moved by the sheer humanity of the moment. When the screen faded to black, the room remained silent for a few seconds, a collective pause to process what they'd just witnessed. Finally, Steve broke the silence, his voice thick with emotion. "Wow," he whispered, taking a deep breath. "I don't even know where to start. That was incredible." He turned to Karoline, his eyes red and glossy. "You have no idea how much this means, not just to them, but to everyone watching, including me." Karoline wiped her own, tears smiling through her emotions. "Thank you," she said softly. "This wasn't about me. It was about them, about letting them know their voices matter too." Steve shook his head, clearly struggling to find the right words. No, he insisted. "This is about you. You've poured your heart into helping these people, and look at the impact you've made. Do you realize how rare that is? How special?" He paused, collecting himself before continuing. "You know, we talk a lot about success on this show, about fame, money, achievements. But this is real success. Changing lives, giving hope, making people believe in themselves, that's what it's all about. And you're living proof of that." The sincerity in his voice resonated throughout the studio. Even the crew members, usually focused on cameras and lighting, stood quietly, visibly moved by the moment. It was clear that this wasn't just another episode of the show. It was something bigger, a reminder of the power of kindness and compassion. Karoline reached over and placed a hand on Steve's arm, her touch gentle yet meaningful. "Thank you for letting me share this with you," she said. "And thank you for reminding me why I do what I do. Moments like these make every challenge worth it." Steve nodded, still emotional but managing a small smile. "You're welcome, Karoline, but honestly, thank you. This is what the world needs more of, people like you who are willing to step up and make a difference." As the segment drew to a close, the energy in the room was electric. There was a sense of unity, of shared purpose that lingered long after the applause died down. The audience knew they had witnessed something extraordinary, not just a story of resilience, but a testament to the ripple effect of kindness, and Steve, ever the master of connection, summed it up perfectly. "Days like this remind me why I love doing what I do," he said, addressing both Karoline and the audience. "Because sometimes it's not about making people laugh. Sometimes it's about reminding them that they're not alone and that there's always hope." With those final words, the camera panned out, capturing the sea of faces in the audience, many still wiping away tears. It was a moment that transcended television, a moment that touched hearts and inspired action. And for Karoline, it was validation that her work was far from over. If anything, it was only beginning. As the weight of the emotional video began to settle, Steve took a moment to compose himself. He adjusted his tie, cleared his throat, and turned back to Karoline with a mix of admiration and curiosity. "All right," he said, his voice still, thick with emotion but steadier now. "After all of this, your story, your work, these incredible messages, what do you want people to take away from today? What's the message you'd give to everyone watching right now?" Karoline sat quietly for a moment, her hands clasped tightly in her lap as she thought about how to put her feelings into words. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a calm strength that resonated deeply. "I guess the first thing I'd say is this. Don't let your circumstances define you," she began, looking directly at Steve before glancing out at the audience. "No matter where you come from or what you're going through, you have the power to change your story." She paused, letting those words sink in before continuing. "Life isn't fair. It never has been, and it probably never will be. Some of us are dealt tougher hands than others. But here's the truth. It's not about what happens to you. It's about how you respond. You can choose to let challenges break you, or you can use them to build something better. That choice is yours." Steve nodded slowly, clearly moved by her words. "That's powerful," he said. "But what about the people who feel stuck? Who feel like they've hit rock bottom and can't see a way out?" Karoline leaned forward slightly, her expression softening. "I've been there, Steve. I know what it feels like to think there's no hope left, to feel invisible, like nothing you do matters. But here's the thing. Even in your darkest moments, you have value. Your pain doesn't define you, it shapes you. And sometimes just knowing that someone else believes in you can make all the difference." Her tone grew more passionate as she continued. "So, if you're struggling, please reach out. Talk to someone, a friend, a mentor, anyone who'll listen. And if you're in a position to help others, don't underestimate the impact you can have. Sometimes, all it takes is one kind word, one act of encouragement to change someone's life forever." The audience listened intently, many nodding along as if her words were speaking directly to their own experiences. Steve chimed in, his voice filled with conviction. "You know, we often wait for big moments or grand gestures to make a difference, but what you're saying is that it's the little things, the everyday acts of kindness that truly matter." "Exactly," Karoline agreed. "It's not about being perfect or having everything figured out. It's about showing up even when it's hard, about extending a hand when someone needs it most. Because trust me, those small actions add up. They create ripples that spread farther than you'll ever realize." She then shifted her focus to the broader message she hoped to leave behind. "This world can feel heavy sometimes," she admitted. "There's so much negativity, so much division, but I believe deep down that most people are good. They just need reminders of that goodness. So my challenge to everyone watching is this: be the light. Whether it's through volunteering, mentoring, or simply offering a listening ear. Find ways to lift others up. Together we can create a chain reaction of hope. Steve smiled warmly, clearly inspired by her call to action. That's beautiful, Karoline. Honestly, it's exactly what the world needs to hear right now. He turned to the audience, his energy infectious. How many of you feel inspired by Karoline's message? Let's give her another round of applause. The crowd erupted into cheers, standing once again to show their support. The room buzzed with energy, a testament to the lasting impact of Karoline's words. People clapped enthusiastically, some raising their hands high while others wiped away lingering tears. It was clear that her message had struck a chord, not just on an intellectual level, but on an emotional one. Karoline looked around the room, visibly humbled by the response. She waved gently, her smile warm and genuine. "Thank you all so much," she said softly. "This means more to me than I can express." Steve leaned back in his chair, shaking his head in awe. "You know, Karoline, I've had a lot of guests on this show over the years, celebrities, athletes, influencers, but few have left such a lasting impression. You remind us of what really matters: connection, compassion, and the belief that we're all capable of greatness." Karoline chuckled, lightly, brushing off the compliment with characteristic humility. "I'm just one person doing what I can," she replied. "The real heroes are the people out there fighting every day to build better lives for themselves and their families. All I'm trying to do is shine a light on their potential." Her sincerity only added to the poignancy of the moment. Steve grinned, leaning forward again to wrap up the segment. "Well, whatever you call it, you're making a difference, and we're lucky to have witnessed it today. Before we move on, is there anything else you'd like to share with our audience?" Karoline hesitated for a second, as if weighing her thoughts carefully. Then, with a determined look in her eyes, she delivered one final, heartfelt statement. "Yes," she said firmly. "If you're watching this and feeling lost, remember this. You are enough, just as you are. Don't let anyone, including yourself, convince you otherwise. Keep going, keep believing, and don't be afraid to ask for help along the way. We're stronger together." With those words, the studio fell silent for a brief moment, the gravity of her message hanging in the air. It wasn't just advice. It was a lifeline, a reminder that no one is alone in their struggles. As the silence gave way to applause, Steve stood up, extending his hand to Karoline. Instead of shaking it, she rose from her seat and embraced him in a heartfelt hug, a gesture that symbolized unity, gratitude, and the shared humanity that had defined the entire conversation. When they finally pulled apart, Steve looked at her with unmistakable admiration. "You're amazing," he said simply. "And I mean that from the bottom of my heart." Karoline smiled, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Thank you, Steve, for everything." As the cameras panned out, capturing the sea of faces in the audience, it was clear that this episode would stay with viewers long after the credits rolled. It wasn't just a talk show, it was a catalyst for reflection, inspiration, and action. And as the lights dimmed and the music swelled, one thing was certain: Karoline Leavitt had left an indelible mark on everyone present and on the hearts of millions watching at home. As the final moments of the segment unfolded, the energy in the studio was electric. The audience, still on their feet from the previous applause, erupted into a standing ovation that seemed to stretch on forever. It wasn't just polite clapping. It was thunderous, heartfelt, and filled with genuine appreciation. People whistled, cheered, and waved their hands in the air, unwilling to let the moment end. For many, it felt like they weren't just celebrating Karoline. They were celebrating hope itself. Steve stood beside her, visibly moved by the overwhelming response. He placed a hand on his chest, taking it all in. "You see this, Karoline?" he said, gesturing toward the cheering crowd. "This is what happens when you touch people's hearts. You've inspired every single person in this room, and probably millions more watching at home." Karoline looked out at the sea of faces, tears streaming down her cheeks once again. She pressed a hand to her heart, overwhelmed by the love and gratitude radiating back at her. I don't even know what to say," she admitted softly, her voice trembling. "Thank you. Thank you for hearing me, for believing in me, for being here today. This means more than words can express." The sincerity in her tone only amplified the emotions in the room. Steve, ever the master of connecting with people, stepped closer to her and put an arm around her shoulders. "You don't have to say anything else," he told her warmly. "Your story speaks for itself. Your work speaks for itself. And trust me, the impact you've made today will stay with us for a long time." He paused, glancing at the audience before turning back to Karoline. "You know, we started this episode thinking it would be just another day on the show. But look at where we are now. You've reminded us of something so important, that kindness, resilience, and compassion can change lives. Not just yours, not just theirs, but ours too." The camera panned across the audience, capturing faces lit up with emotion. Some people wiped away tears, while others hugged their neighbors, sharing in the collective joy of the moment. Even the crew members, who typically remained focused on their tasks, couldn't help but smile as they watched the scene unfold. It was clear that this wasn't just another talk show segment. It was a shared experience, one that transcended the screen and touched everyone involved. Karoline took a deep breath, composing herself before speaking again. "Steve, thank you for giving me this platform," she said earnestly. "And thank you to everyone here today. For listening, for supporting, for caring. If even one person leaves this room feeling inspired to make a difference, then everything I've done has been worth it." Steve nodded, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Well, I can guarantee you it's not just one person," he replied. "It's everyone. Every single person in this room, and beyond, is walking away changed because of you." With that, he turned back to the audience, raising his hands to quiet them down. When the cheers finally subsided, he spoke directly to the viewers at home. "Folks, if you're watching right now, take a moment to think about what Karoline shared today. Think about how you can be the light she talked about, how you can lift someone up, offer a helping hand, or simply remind someone that they matter. Because trust me, those small acts of kindness, they add up. They create ripples that spread farther than we'll ever know." The audience nodded along, many mouthing silent agreements or jotting notes on their phones to remember her message. Steve then turned back to Karoline, his expression soft but serious. "Before we wrap this up, I want to ask you one last question. What's next for you? Where do you go from here?" Karoline smiled, her eyes shining with determination. "Oh, there's still so much to do," she said confidently. "My nonprofit is growing and we're working on expanding our programs to reach even more communities. But honestly, my goal hasn't changed. It's still about helping people realize their potential. Whether that's through mentoring, advocacy, or just showing up when someone needs support, I'm committed to keeping this mission alive." Her passion was infectious, and the audience responded with yet another round of applause. Steve grinned, clearly proud of her resolve. "That's what I like to hear," he said. "You're unstoppable, and I have no doubt you'll keep changing lives wherever you go." As the segment drew to a close, Steve extended his hand to Karoline once more. This time, instead of shaking it, she pulled him into another warm hug, a fitting end to a conversation that had been built on connection and empathy. The two stood together under the bright studio lights, smiling at the audience as the music swelled in the background. Finally, Steve turned to the crowd, his voice booming over the applause. "Let's give one more round of applause for Karoline Leavitt," he shouted, pumping his fist in the air. The audience obliged, cheering louder than ever before. For several minutes, the sound filled the studio, echoing off the walls and lingering in the air like a promise. A reminder that stories like Karoline's have the power to unite, inspire, and transform. When the noise eventually began to fade, Steve leaned toward the camera, addressing the viewers at home. If you were moved by Karoline's story, and I know you were, don't forget to share it with your friends, your family, anyone who needs to hear it. Let's keep this reaction of kindness going. And remember, no matter where you are or what you're facing, you have the power to make a difference, just like Karoline showed us today. With that, the cameras faded to black, signaling the end of the segment. But the impact of Karoline's visit lingered long after the credits rolled. Backstage, producers and crew members approached her to thank her personally, sharing how her message had resonated with them. Audience members lingered in the aisles, reluctant to leave as they exchanged hugs and phone numbers with strangers turned friends. For Karoline, the day had been nothing short of surreal. As she walked off the set, surrounded by well-wishers and fans, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. Her journey wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. Thanks to her courage to share her story, countless lives had been touched, and the ripple effect of her kindness would continue to spread far beyond the confines of the studio. And for Steve Harvey, it was a reminder of why he loved hosting his show. "Days like this," he said to himself as he headed backstage, "are why I do what I do."